Hello, I'm Andrew Morral. I'm a senior behavioral scientist at the RAND Corporation and co-leader of the 2014 RAND Military Workplace Study.
And I'm Kristie Gore. I'm also a senior behavioral scientist here at RAND and the other co-leader of the study. In late 2013 and early 2014, the Department of Defense was urged by some members of Congress to support an independent assessment of sexual assault and sexual harassment in the military. Shortly thereafter, the congressionally mandated Response Systems to Adult Sexual Assault Crimes Panel made a number of recommendations as to how DoD should revise its approach to estimating the number of service members experiencing sexual assaults. We designed the RAND Military Workplace Study specifically to address many of these recommendations and also some criticisms of the existing DoD approaches to estimating sexual assaults and sexual harassment.
To understand the study, you have to understand that we invited survey respondents to take one of two forms. They were randomly assigned to one questionnaire or the other. The first questionnaire was the workplace and gender relations questions that have been used many times in the past decade. We included this questionnaire so that we could track trends over time and ask the questions in the same way that they've been asked in the past. We created a new form to respond to suggestions made by the Response Systems Panel and others that the Department of Defense needs a survey that accurately captures the number of criminal sexual assaults that occur and violations of military equal employment law, such as sexual harassment and gender discrimination. The Workplace and Gender Relations Survey offers a good climate survey, but what we tried to do was develop a survey that would count crimes accurately. So I have two sets of results to provide. The first is from the RAND form, and secondly, the results from the WGRA form, where we can talk about trends. On the RAND form, we are able to estimate that approximately 20,000 active duty service members from across the department likely experienced a sexual assault in the past year. This isn't all service members attacking service members. This includes attacks by spouses, civilians, and others. Using this form, we identify a larger proportion of assaults that are penetrative than was previously thought. In fact, 43% of assaults on women and 35% of assaults on men appear to be penetrative sexual assaults. I'll explain more about this finding later.
And we found statistically significant differences between the services consistent with what has been found in past years. We found that the Air Force and the Coast Guard have the lowest rates of sexual assault compared to the other services. And we find that the Marine Corps and the Navy have higher rates of sexual assault compared to the other services. We will be investigating whether there are demographic differences that could account for some of these differences between the services, or whether there are cultural factors or policies at play.
In terms of sexual harassment, we find that about 26% of active duty women report a past year experience that is consistent with either sexual harassment or gender discrimination. And about 1 in 13 men also experience either sexual harassment or gender discrimination. The pattern of differences between the services is similar to what we see with sexual assault, with the Air Force, women and men experiencing lower rates. Now I'm turning to the prior form, the WGRA form, where we can talk about trends. Using this form, which doesn't measure sexual assault but measures unwanted sexual contact, we can estimate that about 19,000 active duty service members experienced such an unwanted sexual contact in the past year. This is down from 2012. Both unwanted sexual contact and sexual harassment are significantly down in 2014 and are comparable now to the numbers last seen in 2010. This is lower, significantly lower than the levels of sexual assault and sexual harassment seen in 2006.
We fielded this survey by going out to over 500,000 service members. We surveyed all active duty women and a quarter of active duty men, and a random sample of National Guard and Reserves. We also included the entire U.S. Coast Guard Reserve.
In this briefing, I'm only going to be describing the results from the active duty sample. We will report on the reserve sample in the spring and also provide more detailed results from the active duty sample then. Right now, we can say that we received more than 145,000 completed surveys from active duty members. That's a over 30% response rate, and so significantly better than in some recent surveys of the military. With the RAND form, we tried to capture Uniform Code of Military Justice Article 120 sexual assaults. This is the criminal code that defines what sexual assault is for service members. We use the same language as Article 120, and we use the same criteria for determining whether the legal standard has been met for each type of sexual assault described in Article 120. In addition, we did a lot to clarify the time frame over which we were asking people to respond, and we were able to create much simpler questions with clearer terminology that we believe helps respondents provide accurate and precise responses.
And what we found are very similar rates using both surveys. Using the Workplace and Gender Relations Survey, we estimate that approximately 4.3% of active duty women and 0.9% of active duty men reported experiencing at least one unwanted sexual contact in the past year. Using the RAND form, we estimate that approximately 4.9% of active duty women and 1% of active duty men reported experiencing at least one sexual assault in the past year. The differences between these estimates are not statistically significant. In fact, as we extrapolate to the population using the Workplace and Gender Relations estimate, we find that approximately 19,000 service members, active duty service members, experienced an unwanted sexual contact in the past year. And using the RAND form, we estimate that 20,000 active duty service members experienced a sexual assault in the past year.
We believe that despite the similarity between the top-line numbers of unwanted sexual contact and sexual assault measured by the two forms, they are likely measuring different crimes, different events. And one way of looking at this is by comparing the rates of penetrative sexual assault on the WGRA form versus the RAND form. On the WGRA, there is no way of establishing what proportion of service members who had an unwanted sexual contact had a penetrative sexual contact. Instead, that form only asks whether the worst event or the event that had the greatest effect on the person was a penetrative sexual assault. With the RAND form, where we're focusing in primarily on crime, we find that 43% of women who have had a sexual assault had a penetrative sexual assault. This is a significantly larger number. This is also true for men. Whereas on the WGRA form, only 11% of unwanted sexual contacts are penetrative. On the RAND form, 35% of sexual assaults are penetrative. One reason for this difference may be that the RAND form significantly expands what counts as a sexual assault. The question on the old form, the WGRA form, asks about sexual encounters, sexual touching, sexual intercourse, oral sex, and anal sex. The RAND form doesn't emphasize sexuality because it's not required in the law. In fact, some contacts that are merely for to abuse or harass or humiliate people could count as a sexual assault. Moreover, many victims may not experience the contact as sexual, even if it was sexual for the attacker. So we don't ask in the RAND form about sexuality, and that may mean that some men and some women are more likely to report events that they didn't experience as sexual, but do count as sexual assaults. These are just the preliminary results from the RAND military workplace study that we provided to the President in the beginning of December. We have a lot more work to do, more analyses, and we'll be reporting these analyses publicly in the spring of 2015. We'll be looking at the characteristics of the sexual assaults, who's committing these sexual assaults. Are they service members? Are they civilians? Are they spouses? Who's reporting to the military that they were sexually assaulted, and who isn't? Why don't they report it? We've asked questions about this that we'll be analyzing. We'll ask those who have experienced a sexual assault and received services, what services were helpful to them and how satisfied they were with them. And we'll be, as I mentioned, looking at the extent to which demographic differences between services can explain some of these observed differences between rates of sexual assault and sexual harassment between the services.
For more information on the material presented today, please visit rand.org to download our reports.